Hi. How's it going? I know you're all excited. I'm not quite sure I really need to introduce him, but I'll do it anyway. This is Jeph Jacques. He's he's the man behind questionable content, and he's here speaking for ACM Reflection Projections. I hope you guys enjoy.
I'm glad I wore a button down. All right. Can everybody hear me all right? Yes. Okay, good. All right. So hi, I'm Jeph. Basically what I'm going to do is do a brief rundown of the history of my comic, how I got started, how it turned into my full-time job, where it's going to be going in the future. Then I think I'm going to talk a little bit about where I see, where webcomics as a whole are right now and where I think they could be going in the future as well. And then after that, we'll do a Q&A, and you can ask me questions, and I will try to answer them and hopefully be funny. So, let's get started. So, ever since I was a little kid, I drew comics. Literally, the first thing I started doing when I finally learned how to hold a pencil was started drawing pictures and making jokes. I grew up reading Garfield and Calvin and Hobbes and Bloom County and The Far Side, and, all of these classic old newspaper cartoons. And up until, I think, my junior year of high school, that's what I thought I was going to be. I was going to be a cartoonist. This is what I was going to do with my life. I was going to get in the newspapers, and I was going to be, the next Bill Watterson or the next Jim Davis and the next Greg Amman from Foxtrot. And then junior year in high school, I started playing guitar. And pretty much went, fuck art, I want to be a rock star. So I stopped drawing. I went to Hampshire College for music, and that's what I studied all through college, and that's what I have a degree in, which turned out to be incredibly useful. So for 6 years or so, I didn't draw at all. I didn't pick up a pencil or anything like that. I just played guitar and I worked. And I got out of college and predictably, didn't end up a rock star. And ended up working at a local alternative newspaper up in Northampton, Massachusetts. I was basically the office bitch, if you remember Martin's business card from the comic. My job was essentially to sit at a desk, somewhat like this one, and answer the phone whenever it rang, and then direct that call wherever it was going to go. And I didn't really have too much else to do. I would do anything else that people needed me, but 80% of my job was sitting here, waiting for a phone, and surfing the internet. So, and they didn't really care if I, just fucked around online all day because, there was nothing else for me to do. And you might think that being paid above minimum wage to just surf the internet 8 hours a day sounds awesome, but it's actually incredibly soul-crushing. It's really, really bad. It was a terrible job, and I'm one of those people who can't do a good job at anything he's not really, really into. So not only was it a terrible job, I was terrible at this job. So I was stuck at this place for, let's see. Yeah, it was about almost to the end of my first year working there. I was, just sitting here reading a lot of other webcomics at the time. I think the first two I ever came across, and I can't remember what the order was, were Diesel Sweeties, done by my friend Rich Stevens, and, of course, the one that most of you here probably already read, Penny Arcade. And these were the two that I first came across back in college even, but at the time of me having this job, I was reading probably 20 or 30 different strips a day, just because they all updated and it was something you could do, and it passed the time, as I'm sure most of you understand. So basically, I was just sitting around reading comics, hating my job, hating my life. I was in a really shitty band at the time, and I was tired of doing that too, because the problem with being in a band is that you have to coordinate with, at least, 2 or 3 other people, and it's like dating those people as well, because you have to constantly, be juggling their egos and, what they want to do and all this other stuff. And it's very difficult to actually get anything productive done when, you've all got day jobs, and it's really hard to even get together to practice, let alone, play a show or whatever. So I was fed up with that, too. And I was sitting here at my job thinking, man, I need a creative outlet that I can just do by myself. Do everything on my own and just get it out there. Otherwise, I'm going to start murdering my coworkers, and that probably would be a bad thing. And then I was, reading a lot of these comics, and then one day Rich Stevens from Diesel Sweeties posted a bunch of pictures of him and his friends at San Diego Comic-Con. And I was looking through this photo gallery, and I was like, wow, this looks like it's a lot of fun. And I think that's when it first clicked into my head that, like, oh, maybe I could do this. Maybe I could do a webcomic. I used to draw. I mean, how hard can it be, right? Well, it turns out it's pretty hard. But that was kind of the genesis of questionable content. Once I finally, made the decision, like, oh, okay, I want to try this, I spent about 6 weeks just brainstorming ideas and eventually coming up with things. I knew I wanted it to be about people that have sci-fi elements, so I was like, oh, okay, a dude and his robot, that seems like a good starting point. Let's make the dude as depressed as possible, and let's make the robot look like a weird little baby. And that's where Martin and Pint Size came from. And so once I had these ideas, I spent about a week drawing the first 4 strips, and then put those up all at once on August 1st, 2003. And thus QC began. And it was funny at the time. I thought it was literally just going to be about Martin and Pint Size. There wouldn't really be many other characters. It would pretty much just be about the dynamic between these 2 little things. And then Faye showed up. And it was one of those things where she really did just sort of show up. I hadn't planned to have this, crazy, mysterious female character or any of that. But then she came along, and all of a sudden, the plot lines in my head went from this to this massive gradient explosion thing. And I was like, okay, this is good. I can work with this. So yeah, the comic just sort of branched out plot-wise, naturally that way. More people would come in, other characters, different relationships, that sort of thing. And I just kept doing it. I started out updating twice a week for the first month. Then that started to feel really easy, so I switched to doing 3 times a week. And I just did that like clockwork for the first year or so. And in the time of that first year, I was really fortunate in that I was able to make friends with other more established web cartoonists like Rich Stevens and the other guys from Dumbrella, Jeffrey Rowland, all of that. And I happened to make friends with these guys online. They happened to check out my comic, and they liked it. And this is how the first, big links started coming in for my strip. So, I think Sam Logan from Sam and Fuzzy, that bastard, he was the first established guy to ever actually link to the strip. So, that was the first little, trickling influx of readers. And I was fortunate enough at the time that this influx kept coming in and kept growing and kept growing and kept growing to the point where it was, even by the end of its first year, 3 times bigger than even my most, hubristic fantasy was. I mean, my big dream when I was starting out was like, I think this is a pretty good idea. I think maybe someday I'll have 10,000 readers, and that'll be great. And now it's at 400,000, and it's pretty great. But anyway, so for the first year, it just sort of gradually built. I think by the end of August 2004, so almost exactly a year after I'd started the strip, it was up to around 30,000 unique visitors a day, which is pretty sizable. And I was, very excited and very proud of this. And then I got fired. And as I said before, I was really bad at my job, and it was a really bad job. And they were like, we are going to fire you. And I said, okay, what am I going to do now? And so my plan at that point was just to, try and coast on the comic for a couple months, because I was making, maybe a few $100s a month off of T-shirt sales at this point. I was selling, 30 or 40 shirts here and there. And I thought, oh, well, I make enough money off of that I can probably, survive for a month or 2 while I find another job. And then that month or 2 turned into 2 or 3 months, and then that turned into 6 months, and then a year later, my dad, who had been hounding me this entire time, like, you got to get a real job, this isn't going to pay, you can't do this. Well, a year later, my dad saw my first tax return, and he shut up. So My dad is a CPA, so yeah. So yeah, it sort of magically made this much smoother transition than it ever should have into being my job. And a lot of that is due to the undying efforts of my wife, my girlfriend at the time, who was handling all of the business end of stuff, so I could just do the comic and not have to tear my hair out trying to ship shirts and that sort of thing, because shipping shirts is really hard, as we learned. So yeah, it turned into my job, and it was this magical, wonderful thing, and it's still pretty magical and wonderful. It was not without its challenges. It swiftly grew to the point where we had the best problem you can possibly have, where your supply and fulfillment simply cannot keep up with demand. It became a thing where if you ordered a shirt from us, it would take like 3 months to get there, because it was literally just me and Christy in a warehouse full of shirts, sitting there going, "Oh God." Oh. And so it was getting really out of hand. So we eventually switched to Tapato Co., my lovely distribution company here, and they handle all of that. And that was the second best decision I've ever made. The first decision, the best decision I've ever made, having obviously been not to get Martin and Faye together around Comic 500. Yeah, and that's a whole other story that I'll probably get into. So yeah, that pretty much brings us to the present. I've got like almost 1,800 comics now, which is terrifying. And the first book is coming out literally any day now. I was hoping that I would have some here, but they hadn't come in yet. But maybe as early as next week. We shall see. Yeah, so that brings us to the present, and that's pretty much how my comic came to be what it is. And it's interesting because in the 7 years that I've been doing the strip now, I've seen the face of webcomics as it is, as the fledgling industry that it has become, change radically. I mean, when I started out, there were maybe two comics out there that people made a living off of: Penny Arcade, PvP, I think Diesel Sweeties at that point, but like that was it. Everybody else was doing it as a hobby or a part-time job or something like that. Now, I'd say there are probably at least 100 strips out there that support not just like one guy, but entire families or entire corporations or like collaborative groups. I mean, Penny Arcade has a staff of like 12 full-time employees now, and they run 2 of the biggest conventions in the country at this point. So it's become an industry when it was really just a little underground thing when I started. The other thing that we're starting to see is more talent coming in. When I started out, it was just people who started doing comics online because they couldn't get them printed, or they couldn't afford to have like a small press run. They couldn't get into the newspaper because they had jokes about butts in it or whatever. Nowadays, we're seeing kids, the age of a lot of you guys here, coming out of school with art degrees and going immediately into doing online comics. So the level of quality of art and writing has just skyrocketed over the years. And at the same time, the barrier of entry drops further and further and further every day. There are so many different ways you can get your comic out there now. You can put it up on a Tumblr. You can put it up on Facebook even. I mean, that's how the comic Cyanide and Happiness got started. I think they're still the biggest comic in the world simply because there are so many people who just look at it through Facebook instead of through, even their website. They have millions and millions of people checking out their stuff. You can put it out on LiveJournal or Blogger or, I think I said Tumblr, and you can, do the smart thing, which is get your own website and buy some hosting and do it that way. But even that is ridiculously easy. I mean, you saw when I was messing around before the talk started how quick it is to find a domain name and buy it for $15. I mean, my friend Jeff Rowland owns about 40 just novelty domain names now because that's what he does when he gets drunk. And it's kind of a game, we try to come up with the worst, phrase in the world, like angry twinks, and see if that's available. And it turns out it usually is. So yeah, the barrier of entry is dropping even as the level of quality is going up, and the level of innovation is through the roof these days. The best example of this is, of course, MS Paint Adventures, which is barely even a comic. It's like a video game and a cartoon and a movie, and he puts out albums and he does all this crazy stuff, and it's just one guy doing these crazy little animations, and he never leaves his house. But yeah, and it's this amazing thing. This is I don't know how many of you people are familiar with Scott McCloud and his books Making Comics and Understanding Comics, but he talked about kind of, I believe it was in Understanding Comics, how he thought the future of comics on the web was going to be something that incorporated all these multimedia elements, sound, interactivity, animation, things like that. MS Paint Adventures is the first thing we've seen that actually does that, and I think there's going to be a lot more of it in the future. And it's just so good and weird, and yeah, it's wonderful. So yeah, people are doing different things. Even something like nobody would have predicted XKCD's success 5 years ago, because like, oh, it's stick figures and they make math jokes. And like, I could do that. Well, you might be able to do that, but Randy's the guy who did, and so yeah. And when I first went full time, we were all thinking like, okay, the biggest comic in the world right now is Penny Arcade, and they're always going to be the biggest, and there's never going to be anything that comes along that tops that. Now there's other stuff that's right up there with them, like XKCD and MS Paint and, as I said, Cyanide and Happiness, and there are a few others. So it just keeps renewing itself, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger, and more money starts coming in as well, which means more people can do it as their jobs, which is great, because that also encourages innovation. Not everything is just a comic about two guys sitting on a couch talking about video games anymore. So yeah, I think we're going to see a lot more of that as well. I certainly hope we do anyway. Let me consult my notes here before I start to ramble. Other things I think we're going to start to see. One interesting thing that we haven't seen yet is any corporate takeovers. Big businesses have yet to figure out how to make money off of an online comic. They've certainly tried. Something like DC Comics' Zuda contest, where they basically held, a contest to see who would win, and the winner got to, do their own online comic sponsored by DC and potentially going into print, and that completely flopped. They ended up closing it down and all of these things. So we haven't seen any big corporations really find a way to make money, and they're certainly trying. The newspaper industry at this point is, dying a slow and horrible death, and with that, the syndicated comics industry is as well. So a lot of these guys are terrified now because they're seeing their entire lifestyle drying up right before their eyes. And I don't know how many of them are going to be able to make the shift over, because it's a radically different way of working. I mean, if you're a syndicated cartoonist, you just draw a strip a few times a day and then put them in the mail, and then you get a check. And that's really all there is to it. With us, I mean, I have to, get up in the morning, check my email, check Twitter, answer everything that's important, figure out new merch, work on the book, work on the comic some more, because that first idea was terrible. There's so much more work involved in running any online business, let alone a creative pursuit like doing a comic, that a lot of people just aren't willing to put in that investment, especially when it's no guarantee. I mean, I said earlier that I think there are about 100 comics out there right now that support their creator, and that's out of probably 30,000 comics that are on the web right now. So the level that you have to get to support yourself is also very high. And even then, I do okay, but I'm not rolling in the Benz, So, where was I? Okay, so yeah, corporate people haven't figured out a way to make money off of it yet, but I could see that changing. And really all it is going to take is one thing that works before the entire business model could change. It could end up something like, the music industry back when that was viable, where we have big syndicates or big labels that promote people, and the level of promotion that you would get through that is so much bigger than what you could do on your own. That would be terrible. Thankfully, I don't think that's going to happen, because free stuff on the internet always wins. But it's certainly possible. Another negative development that, frankly, a lot of us worry about and try to discourage are, these pages where they basically just scrape the RSS feed of 100 different comics, and I'll just post them right there so you can read them all at once without going to a single site. That's convenient for you guys, but it sort of sucks for us, because we make our money by you going to our site and seeing our things, and, not even like looking at the ads, but at least getting them displayed. So I worry that, eventually, if one of those becomes popular to the point where it's taking away a significant chunk of traffic, that's going to be a hit, and another barrier that people are going to have to negotiate before they can actually make a living off of their work. And again, that's something that I don't think is definitely going to happen, especially because we do what we can to discourage that kind of site. But it's possible, and it's a concern. As far as good stuff that could happen, I think it's virtually just a matter of time before there is a TV show or a movie based on a webcomic. We've already seen you guys are familiar with Brian O'Malley's Scott Pilgrim. That got turned into a movie that was, not the most successful thing at the box office, but I think it'll do fine beyond that. And he's about as close to web cartoonist as print guys get. I mean, he's done stuff online, and he built a reputation largely through the internet, and it got him this huge, awesome movie. So I think it's only a matter of time before somebody else gets picked up for a movie or a TV show. I know a few guys who are actively pursuing that right now, and you never know with that sort of thing. It can take years to, even get an answer. But I think that's only a matter of time. So, yeah, I think the sky is generally the limit as far as these things go. And I've run out of things to say. So I think it's time for you guys to start asking me questions. Oh, man, right away? That fast? Usually, like, there's an awkward pause because nobody wants to be the first dude, and then I have to start making fun of people until they ask me questions. All right, you, sir.
You started talking about threats. Wondering if you experience net neutrality at all? Do you see that affecting you?
I'm certainly concerned about it. I think net neutrality is definitely something that everybody who values the internet should be concerned about. I am less concerned about it than some people, though, simply because, like I said before, free stuff on the internet always wins. I read a quote somewhere recently, and I can't remember who said it, but the gist of it was just that the internet has evolved to treat censorship like a cancer, and it actively fights it. And I think that's very true. I mean, you look at all of the efforts that the RIAA and the movie industry have put into fighting piracy, and look how successful that's been, right? So I think even with, God forbid, net neutrality failing, I think something will come along that will get around it. I certainly hope it will, and I think that is the natural progression of things. Whether it's the internet or whether it's something completely different, who knows? But I think there would still be hope even then, because free stuff always wins. I mean, that's the core of our business model, is give it away for free. And then if you want to give me money, great, but you don't have to. Yeah. You, sir.
Your style has changed a lot since you
Oh, God, yes.
How much of that was your act?
I think it was a combination of the two. It was a funny thing because, like I said, I had drawn my entire life up until high school, and then I dropped it for a few years. And it's not really like riding a bike. At least it wasn't for me. I completely forgot everything I knew about drawing or any sort of illustration when I started QC. And on top of that, I was starting in a completely different medium using a Wacom tablet in Photoshop as opposed to drawing on paper. So I had forgotten everything, I had lost all the motor skills, and I was using an unfamiliar medium. That's about half of why those early strips looked so awful. And then the other half was just, I just wasn't that great at drawing at that point and had to learn. It's definitely a conscious thing. I'm always tweaking stuff here and there, and it's usually a very subtle thing, so you don't notice it unless you make big jumps through the archive. It's a very slow process. And God, I hope it keeps going, because I still need to get so much better. Yeah, it was really weird going back to the first 300 strips for the first book that's coming out, and having to look at them, because I can't look at stuff last week without seeing nothing but mistakes. So that was really interesting. And then having to go back and redraw some of them in my current style was also this very strange and surprisingly emotional process. Revisiting 23-year-old me and going, man, I was an ass back then. So yes, all you young folks, that's what you get to look forward to when you're 30. All right, who's next? In the back. It's who? Oh, yes, the Roomba. The Roomba, I imagine when I write things for the Roomba, a lot of times I think back to, like, the first Star Wars movies. You know how, like, whenever they went, like, cut to a shot like on the Death Star or a spaceship, and there are all these little, toaster robots just kind of zooming around, not really doing anything. It's like, I imagine like that's what being a Roomba must be like. It's like, well, what does it even do with itself when it's not? So it'll be back. A, because it's fun to write, and B, because Roombas are really easy to draw. So if I'm ever strapped for time. So, yeah, and the people at iRobot love me. So, all right. You, sir.
Couple of questions. One is, I guess you.
Okay, I'll tackle the first one first. My education, partially the music, but more specifically just the mode of education that I went through has been like absolutely instrumental in what I do for a living. I went to Hampshire College, which is a little liberal arts school up in western Massachusetts. And it's a very different sort of undergrad program than your usual, you have course requirements and you take tests and, you have all these things. At Hampshire, it's more, I've been told, since I've never been to grad school, I wouldn't know, but I've been told it's more like grad school where it's more self-directed and it's project-based, and oh God, do you do a lot of writing, so much writing. And it's largely self-directed. You don't have, you have advisors, but you can simply forget to go to them for a couple of years, like I did, and then they forget who you are, and then they're like, oh, well, I guess you can have a degree. So yeah, it was, especially the last 2 years of my time there, it was entirely self-directed work. I was deciding what classes I wanted to do, and then deciding what I wanted to work on in those classes. So you had to be very self-motivating, and you had to be capable of getting yourself to do the work as opposed to having somebody else to tell you, all right, I need this by Friday. It has to be like, okay, if I don't get this done by Friday, I'm not going to be able to do all the other stuff that I have to do on time. So that experience was very good for preparing me to run my own business and to do something on the internet where it's like, oh, I don't feel like doing a comic tonight. I guess I just won't do one, which is something a lot of guys out there do, but thankfully I generally don't. As far as the music education went, it's certainly informed the comic, especially early on when there are all the jokes about indie rock and stuff like that. Yeah, it's definitely I take inspiration from everywhere, and my college experience and what I studied in college is definitely a big part of that. As for the Yelling Bird stuff, he's kind of like my id. He's just he's the little screaming sociopath inside my head that I get to let out when I'm feeling tired or just angry or whatever. So he's surprisingly easy to write. He's also very heavily inspired by the comic Jerk City, which I had up earlier, which is ironically one of the longest running strips on the internet. It started back in 1997 and has been updating 7 days a week ever since. And they are up to, yes, 4,300 comics, all like this. Just nothing but dick jokes and screaming. And I highly recommend reading it, especially read all of the archives at once, except that it changes something inside of you, and not really for the better. But yeah, he's been a big inspiration on the Yelling Bird. All right, there were other hands. It's the other end. You, sir. It's up to 12 terabytes now. So yeah, I pay more for hosting every month now than I did for my last apartment. Yeah, it's thank God I make good ad revenue money, or I'd be screwed. We actually just upgraded the server, so I have newer, fancier stuff and things. So yeah, it's a hefty bill, but thankfully it's a reliable service. So yeah. All right, somebody in the middle now. You. Everybody either knows Marigold or is Marigold. There's never not somebody that you know. She's not really inspired by anybody. She just sort of came into my head one day, and I was like, yeah, I want to do a really nerdy, awkward, shy girl, and make that make that fun. And I thought she would be a good foil for Hannelore, which it turns out she's a pretty good foil for Hannelore. Yeah, she's my favorite character now. I just have so much fun writing her. And yeah, and she's also very different than my other characters in that she's not, like everybody else in the comics, fairly self-aware. You know, they get into a situation and their first response is like, well, what do I think about this? Or like, what is, you know, like they're always aware of themselves in a given situation. And Marigold is very much not. She's just constantly reacting to things, and usually the wrong way. And yeah. The whole Marigold and Dale thing is a perfect example of that. She's just, oh, she hates him so much. So much. Did not put that on well enough. All right, let's try this again. Okay, so, you, sir. Well, it certainly seems to work for me. And not intentionally, but I draw stupid things on characters' T-shirts sometimes, and then it's never a conscious thing where it's like, I want to make a T-shirt, so I'm going to put it on a character. But like with Martin's Cash shirt, it was just something I tossed on at the very beginning, and people asked for it, and it eventually got to a point where it was like, oh, it's January, and I need to pay the rent. I guess we'll make that shirt now. And that turned out well. So it certainly works. I think one of the reasons it works for me, at least what I like to think, is that it's not really a cynical thing. It's not like I'm like, I need to move some units, so I'm going to put one of my shirts on the character today. Because I think that on the internet, especially with the low barrier between artists and the people who consume their art, people can really sense fakeness, and so you don't want to be fake at all. You want to seem very genuine and be very genuine, and I think that's been the key to my success, at least with people buying shirts that they see in the comic. Also, people like cute stuff, and I make a lot of cute stuff. So, yes, like this one. I don't even know what this means. I don't think it means anything, but people like it, and it glows in the dark. So, yeah. All right, next question. You on the left. Nope, you. Yes. It's a funny thing with collectives, because it seems to me like the days of the collective are sort of passing. They still exist, but they're changing now. Instead of being like a group for promoting each other's work, now it's almost more like a financial collective in some ways, because the chief reason things like Dumbrella and Day Free Press existed were so that you could afford to go to a convention and get a table. I mean, like getting a table at San Diego Comic-Con is like $2,000. That's just for the table. That's not even for the chairs. So, that's a huge investment for one person to make. But if you can get 8 other dudes to go in with you on it, then it's a piece of cake, and you all make money, and it's all good. So that seems to be kind of the extent of collectives at this point. Everybody does well enough on their own, and there's so much cross-promotion anyway outside of collectives because we all know each other, because we all see each other at the same 20 conventions every year. So yeah, I think collectives are kind of going the way of the dodo. They're largely being replaced by things like Topato.co, which is, oh, hi Topato, which is sort of like a collective in that there are so many different artists on here doing so many different things. Yeah, that Nick Cage T-shirt is terrifying. Yeah, I mean, we've got all of these web cartoonists, and then we've also got people like Brandon Bird, who does, the crazy pop culture paintings, and we've got a couple people from, like, NPR. Jonathan Colton, I think, is on here as well. Yeah, he's right here. So this is kind of the new collective, where it's a business thing, and we're all friends and we all get along, but it's about helping each other make money. And it's funny, when I finally joined Topato.co, I was a little bit worried that, like, my sales would drop because, like, oh, look at all this competition I have over here for, your $20. But it turns out that the sales actually just go up for everybody, because now not only do I have you guys looking at my shirts and potentially buying them, but I've got all of Dresden Kodak's fans, and I've got all of Cat and Girls fans, and all of Kate Deaton's millions of fans. So yeah, this is kind of the future, I think. This is the way it ought to be and the way it works really well. All right, in the back, in the middle. Well, I'm fortunate in that I get to spend the majority of my time working on the comic itself. That takes up the majority of my day, of my working day anyway. As far as like dividing that up, the art takes between 2 and 4 hours a strip, just depending on how complicated it is. Writing takes anywhere from 5 seconds in the shower that morning to 6 hours just staring at BD Edit going. So that is the bulk. My wife is a great organizer, and so she is much better at handling things like booking convention appearances or talks or things like that. So she handles all of the sort of the secretarial things that I am just terrible at. And then thankfully, now that we're with Topado Co., I don't have to worry about the merch. Beyond designing it, I just give it to Jeffrey, and it magically appears on the site, and then I get a check. Back when we were doing it on our own, Christy was working like 12 to 14-hour days every day, and I was working probably, I would say, 5 or 6 hours a day, and then having to go do the comic, just because she was way better at it than I am. I still can't fold a T-shirt to save my life, so yeah, I'm very lucky that I get to focus on the comic as opposed to all of the other stuff. As far as social media and stuff goes, I mean, I'm on Twitter all day no matter what I'm doing, so that I don't even factor in. Jeffrey's cat? Oh, Joanna? Yeah, she's a butt cat. All right, next. You've been waiting. Look at that.
I'm curious about the idea of like a webcomic ending. It's like if you think about the way that newspaper or really popular comic like X-Men.
And the authors die, and then there's, yeah.
And then you sort of go to, you sort of went to Vertigo kind of.
Mm-hmm.
And webcomics are kind of in between. Like I'm thinking, and now you go on, you read whatever he does or whatever Warren Ellis does. And the only ones I can really think of that have ended are Shed.
Mm.
And I'm wondering how you see that. Do you think it's going to be a problem for people that end their...
Oh, you mean like me? It varies a lot on a case-by-case basis. There are a few other guys who have ended things. Evan Dom, who does fantastic comics, he's done 2 entire series now, Rice Boy and Order of Tales, that have both ended, and he's working on a new one now. So I think it varies case by case. There are some strips that I could see going like newspaper strips until the guy dies, like PvP. I don't see that ever having to come to a closure or an ending unless Scott Kurtz decides he wants to do that. As for me, when I started it, I thought it would last 2 years, and then by that time I'd have either gotten sick of it or run out of ideas. And it turns out that's not what happened. So I'm leaving it open-ended. If I ever get to a point where it feels like it's time to move on, or I really hate the comic now, or I've gotten to a place where it seems like it should end, I'll probably end it. But I have no idea if or when that'll happen. It could be next year, could be 10 years from now, I don't know. Nice apron, by the way. Awesome. Let's see. It changed over time. When I was a little kid, I was really, really into Garfield. Like that's the one that got me started reading comics. After Garfield, when Calvin and Hobbes came out and took off, I really got, how can you not love Calvin and Hobbes? And then as I got older, I started going back and discovering other things that, were a little bit over my head when I was a kid, like Burke Breathitt's stuff, Bloom County and Outland, And that's probably the biggest single newspaper comic influence on my strip, because he had this big cast of characters doing all these wacky, like, separate things, and he would just jump around. And that's pretty much how I do things. As far as other comics that have influenced QC, Scary Go Round by John Allison was probably the single biggest influence starting out. It was definitely my favorite comic when I was starting QC, so I took a lot of inspiration from that. These days, I really love Danielle Corsetto's Girls with Slingshots. I feel like that's kind of the sister comic to mine. They're similar, but also different. Let's see, Jeff Rollins' Overcompensating is amazing, and I read that a lot, and his sense of humor is sort of creeping into my strip as well. So yeah, I think that's about it as far as influences that I can think of. Oh, and also, As a Manga Dio has been like a huge thing. Because it's like the peanuts of manga. How can you not love it? So yeah, let's see, you.
My question is, do any of your...
Yes, she went to college. Yeah.
Or like Penelope, they're not in anymore. Do you just get sick of the characters, or do they just...
Character appearances generally are just based on how many ideas I have for them. And Raven is a special case because it turned out that Raven was by far the hardest character to write in my strip. Because it would have been very, very easy to make her a one-note character where every single time she's in a comic, the joke is, haha, she's dumb. You know? And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to make it balanced so she seemed, kind of naive or spacey or whatever, but also, had this little core of intelligence. And that's very hard to do well. And it just became a thing where it was like, well, I could spend 6 hours trying to make this Raven punchline work. Or, oh, hey, I just had 15 ideas for what Hannelore can do for the next 3 months. So, it's a case of just what I have ideas for and things like that. Like, Penelope will be back, for sure. I have plans, but it takes so long to get anything done in my comic that, I have like 6 other characters just waiting in the wings to be introduced, and I'm like, no, I can't introduce any more until I at least get other people established. Like, I've done, 4 strips with Cosette in them now, and I'm already thinking about the next character that I'm going to put in. It's a problem I have. All right, I saw hands up over here. You.
Speaking of Hannelore, I've been kind of confused by her art a little bit. I was curious, when she first appeared, she hit on... Hello period?
Retcon. She was on medication at the time that made her really spacey. The truth of the matter was, when I introduced her, I had an idea of what I wanted to do with her. I wanted to, have OCD and have these problems, but I hadn't really figured out how to write that yet. So when she started out, she was very much like, oh, look, it's another skinny, pale chick with a witty sense of humor. So, and I'm glad I got away with that, or away from that with her. So, I guess both. So yeah, it was just one of those things where she evolved rapidly away from what she initially started out as. I still get people asking me about why the hell she would ever smoke, but yeah. And you?
Speaking of depression, how do you feel that's affecting
Oh God. It's made it go up really late at night a lot. I've been fortunate in that, I'm on really good medication now for my anxiety and my obsessiveness, so that's really, really helped. Also, just getting older, you kind of mellow out a little bit, I found. It's definitely, it was a big part of why I started the comic to begin with. I was miserable and I needed something to do. That's why Martin is so miserable at the beginning of the comic. It's just me filtering everything that was bothering me through into him. So yeah, it's played a big part. I think I having experienced it, I think I have a decent understanding of what it's like, at least for a lot of people, and so I try to make that come through as well. And one of the messages of my comic that I try to get across indirectly is that, if there's something wrong, you can get help, and it can get better. You're not stuck. And so that's what I try to show people, that, it's possible to have a mental health problem and still be functional, or still have a fulfilling life. It's possible to get better if you're depressed. All you have to do is do something about it. Let's see. The back.
What would you say is the biggest asset to a comic?
Biggest asset is the fact that they're free, without a doubt. like I said earlier, free stuff on the internet wins. Nobody's figured out how to make a non-free webcomic make any money. People have been trying ever since they, first started, and it always fails. That is the single biggest thing, that you can find a comic, you read one strip that you like, you go back and you read a couple hundred of that same thing that day, later that week, whenever. That's the biggest thing. There's no barrier of entry. It doesn't cost you anything but time. In my experience, the good stuff seems to float to the top. Like if you look at something like XKCD or MS Paint Adventures, they literally came out of nowhere. Like when they blew up, none of us had any idea who Randall Munroe was or who Andrew Hussey was. But all of a sudden, they're there, and all these people are reading them, and it turns out they're fantastic, and that's why. So it's definitely, there are certainly some comics that are, a little bit overlooked or underhyped considering their quality. Like I can think of a few that I don't understand why they're not more popular than they are. But even those are still, they're still pretty popular. It just seems like the good stuff gets found more often than not. So I don't worry about that too much. In the back.
So when you draw your comic every day,
I start with just a blank Photoshop file. I reuse backgrounds whenever I can because backgrounds just take forever and I hate drawing them. But I don't really copy and paste characters or anything. I used to back when I had a day job just because I didn't have time otherwise. But no, I pretty much try to do as much from scratch as I can within the time constraints of having to get a strip done every day. Let's see. You.
how far do you have stuff pointing out?
I have Monday's comic done. Actually, I have kind of plot points mapped out for potentially years in advance that I just sort of aim for. I nudge things one way or the other as I go. But frequently those will change over time, or I'll come up with a different idea, or the characters will just do something that I wasn't really expecting. Like the whole Martin and Faye talk thing is the best example of that. I thought that was just going to be the big reveal at the end of the comic, and then Martin and Faye were going to get together, and it would be a happy ending. And QC's done, bye, But it turned out that oh wow, it's actually much more interesting if they don't get together, and I can keep doing it as a job. Let's do that instead, and that opened up a whole other avenue. So I just try to let it go where it wants to, but I do aim for specific things. I have plans. I have so many plans. All right. You, sir.
So, have you ever considered having
Tried. I spent about a year trying to maintain a buffer of one strip, and it was horrible. It was the worst thing. I just can't do it. I'm one of those people who has to have an imminent deadline to get anything done. The QC book should have been out a year ago. But it wasn't, because every time I asked when it had to be done, people were just like, oh, whenever you can. Which means I'm never going to do it. And then in August, David Malky, the guy who put it together and who does Wondermark and a few other things, said, I need it by the end of this month. And if you can't get it done by the end of this month, it won't come out this year. And I said, thank fucking God. Because then, that's all I did that month when I wasn't doing the regular comics, because this has to get done. So I can't work on anything but an imminent deadline. It gets awful. In the back.
what's your favorite album by Hum?
Oh, good question. My favorite is always going to be Downward is Heavenward. I think that was their peak, both chronologically and musically, but I like all of their stuff. I really wish they would remaster You'd Prefer an Astronaut, because it's really quiet these days, but yeah, I love all their shit, but Downward is definitely my favorite. Also Wu-Champaign bands, yeah. Amen.
Anybody ask you about opening for coffee?
Oh, yes. I tell them that business model would not work in the real world. Yeah. Anybody else? Let's see. You in the back.
So, when you were talking about not having
It definitely helps me keep on task. I mean, I feel like if I've got a couple hundred people watching me, I can't just, fuck around on the internet halfway through for an hour. So that's the chief reason I do it. And also I get to play, music for people, and, I get to do my little pretend radio station, so that's fun. Currently, it's about 50-50 ad revenue and merchandise sales. When the book comes out, that's hopefully going to swing a little bit over more towards merchandise for a while. For a long time, it was like, I would make 80% of my income just on T-shirt sales. But as T-shirt, like the whole funny internet T-shirt thing is kind of tapering off, and other merch is like those aprons we can't keep in the stock now because they're a new, different thing, and it's a cute little design and stuff. So it's all about diversifying now. So I'm trying to get different streams of revenue coming in and, make it a little bit more robust as opposed to depending entirely on T-shirt designs or entirely on ads or anything like that. Because ad money is great, but it could dry up like that. You just never know with that stuff. So. Yeah. I can't really figure out how his internal anatomy works. So. It's like, we've seen him talk with his head detached, so like all of his, central processing stuff must be up there. But then he's got like the disk drive and the power supply down in his body, and that doesn't really make sense. I don't know. They make these little USB sticks now that look like little plastic pint sizes. And we've got a plush one coming out next year. So. Oh God, the first prototype for that was hilarious because, he's like this little, plastic guy. So I figured like he would have either like a suede fur thing or just like really short fur. The first thing they sent me looked like a little green Yeti. It had like half-inch long fuzz for its covering, and I was like, this is not a pint size. I'm sorry, but no. So, yes. All right, you sir.
You mentioned briefly the use of like Wacom tablets. How does technology, like these kinds of technology, influence like?
Once Apple or Google or whoever release a tablet that will run Photoshop with Wacom touch sensitivity on it, that's all I'll ever use. I think that is where the future of digital art is going to be. The technology's not quite there yet. It's hard to say how much it's influenced everybody in general because everybody I know has a different process. So there's no like one way of doing it. I do everything in Photoshop. Other people use Photoshop and Illustrator. Other people draw by hand and then scan it in and then color that in Photoshop. Other people use Painter. There's so many different ways of making art and then getting it online now that the variety is just stunning and can often be a little intimidating, I think, to people just getting into it. It's like, oh, well, do I have to get the big fancy Wacom tablet or can I just get the little $100 one? You can get the $100 one. But yeah, it's exciting, and I wish Photoshop didn't crash so goddamn much. But yeah, digital art, I love it. It's good. In the back.
Which is your musical opinion?
Oh, I haven't really got too much backlash. I do still get about one angry email a year from an Insane Clown Posse fan. But I don't pay too much attention to that. I don't know. I try to keep most of my opinions on music positive, just because I enjoy being positive about things more than I enjoy complaining about stuff. So aside from Animal Collective, I'm so fucking tired of Animal Collective. But yeah, so whenever I talk about bands, I try to point people towards good things as opposed to tell them that what they like is stupid, So that is my plan. And because of that, I don't really get a whole ton of backlash unless I say something particularly like intentionally inflammatory on Twitter, which is fun to do sometimes. Let's see. Ooh.
Other than technical aspects, like
I first knew I was internet famous when I found porn of my comic. Porn, I should add, that was better drawn than I could draw. Yeah, that was both when I knew I had made it and when I knew I was seriously jaded, because I looked at it and I went, man, they gave all of the girls huge porn star boobs. They don't have those in the comic. And then there was a very touching piece with Martin and Amir getting it on, and that was cute. Yeah, that was when I knew it. And then there are little moments, like, because I'm pretty public about, the comic's set in Northampton and I live in Northampton, so I do get stopped on the street very occasionally. People are like, are you Jeph? I'm like, I'm a Jeph. What are you doing here? I'm buying a mop. It's Target. So, yeah. Anybody else?
What's the most backlash you've gotten from a decision?
Oh, the Vespa Avenger storyline. Oh, God. That one, a lot of people liked it, and a lot of people thought it was the worst thing I'd ever done, and, like, threatened my life if I ever did anything like that again. So that was a stressful couple weeks. I was like, no, it's really funny, guys. Trust me. And they're like, it's shit. And I was like, oh. So, yeah, that's the only time I feel like I've taken what might have been a misstep with the strip, because the tone was very different than anything else I've done. So, I think it worked, but it might have worked better in a different comic. Yes, sir.
You called your comic an online business, and
Pretty much it's just me and my wife. I say we because I do have a guy who, runs the server for me, and I pay him like $70 a month or something small, because he usually doesn't have to do that much. So there's definitely like a team, and then I'm very good friends with Jeffrey from Tapato Co. and all the employees there, and I work pretty closely with him on merchandise designs too. Like, I'll submit something, he'll send it back with a couple of tweaks to ideas or whatever. Like we have one coming up, one of the new T-shirt designs. I was like really running out of time for ideas, and I had to get some done before the Christmas deadline, so I just drew a picture of a shark. And I was like, okay, why did I draw this? Okay, sharks are cute too. Okay, that's good enough. I'll just send that to Jeffrey. And Jeffrey sends it back to me saying, I think it should say, sharks are cute too. Okay? And that works much better as a design, so we went with that. So it's nice to be a little bit defensive about your love of sharks. So.
one more thing, which is, you mentioned kind of like the website.
Oh, no, that's fine. I mean, if you subscribe to my RSS feed, you still get like my Project Wonderful ads. So I'm still getting those page views. So it's not like it's costing me anything. I mean, if I were really against RSS, I just wouldn't have one. But then, God, so many people would complain. So yeah, no, I have no problem with like using my RSS feed. It's people who like scrape my images from the site to host elsewhere that kind of bug me, because that's taking my stuff and using it for your thing, which is different.
Yeah, you mentioned like possible movies coming out of webcomics. Any possible?
Oh God, I don't even know. I don't know. I watch so few movies that I don't really know anything about actors or actresses. I do think James Earl Jones would be a pretty good pint size. Alternately, Patrick Stewart would be good. Although he'd also play a good Hannelore, so... In the back. Well, that's a funny case. I mean, it's written into the contract that he has with everybody that if you want to leave for any reason, you can leave. You just have to let him know enough in advance. I don't really see that happening, but it is a business based on friendship, and sometimes those go wrong, so you never know. It wouldn't be that hard because there are already plenty of other businesses that just do order fulfillment online. The guys in Penny Arcade use this business called Amplifier that's based out of Texas that does all of their order fulfillment. They have to run their own store software, so it's not like Topatoco where I just send him designs and they appear on a different website. They have to like do all the coding themselves, but the fulfillment can be handled by somebody else. So it would certainly be possible to move over, and that wouldn't really be a corporate takeover thing because this technology is already in place to do that for so many other businesses. Well, it's a combination of, you get a certain number of easy jokes with a character, and that number varies from character to character. And it's been so long since Pie Size has been around that I have long since exhausted all of the easy jokes with him. So if I come up with something for him, it has to be, like, different. And if I come up with, yet another, like, oh, look, he got a wacky prop from somewhere and is doing something joke, well, that feels kind of boring to me. Also, I think he just works well in small doses. I've tried to write entire storylines that were centered around the Anthro-PCs, and for whatever reason, I just got incredibly bored with them very fast, and it was just like, oh, no, I want to go back to people talking about feelings. So, yes. All right. You, sir. I actually have plans for a short graphic novel, QC graphic novel that I'd like to do. Tricky part is it would probably take me at least a year of working on it every day to get done. But I have the concept done. I could probably write the whole thing in a week if I sat down and did it. It's just a matter of whether I can find the time. I think now that the first book is out, I should probably just get on my ass and start working on it. Well, I actually said on my ass by mistake. But that makes sense since that's how I do all my work. So, yeah. So, yes, I definitely would like to do some longer form stuff in the future. Let's see.
You talked about like people.
Yeah, a lot of them actually. Especially like Evolution Kills and Science is a Verb Now were both two like just kind of nonsensical phrases that came into my head, and I decided to toss them on a shirt. It's always shirts that Dora wears for some reason. I tossed them on her in the comic, and I got 40 emails the next day like, I want that on a shirt. And so I think, well, I can't just put Evolution Kills on a shirt. That doesn't make any sense without context. And then the rest of the design sort of just popped into my head. So it's often a surprise. There are other things like baking a science that I did it, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to have to make this a shirt. And I was right. And an apron. Yeah.
Have you ever got...
Nope. I get a lot. I get a few emails a year, and they're my favorite emails to get because they're so funny and sad. Of people writing me fan mail and trying to get themselves written into the comic as a character, but like trying to hide the fact that it's them. They're like, I got this great idea for a new character for you. His name is going to be Jimmy, and he's going to be about 5'9", and he's going to weigh about 120 pounds. And he's got spiky blonde hair. It's not too blonde. It's this very specific shade of blonde. He's got green eyes, and he plays banjo, and he does all this thing. And it's like, it becomes increasingly obvious that they're talking about them, that they want to be in the comic. And then they always want to end up dating Raven. Every single one of them. I don't know why. It's always, and if Raven gets a crush on him, that would be cool too. And it's like, no, I'm not going to do that. So, yes, no, I don't really take reader suggestions, but it's actually really frustrating because sometimes people will email me with really good ideas, and I'm like, oh, I want to do that, but I can't because it's not mine. So yeah. Actually, I am paying one girl because she sent me this email with, she had mapped out all the interpersonal relationships in the comic with like, colored lines and a little key to explain everything. And it was, of course, ridiculously complex and funny. And I was like, I need to make a print of that. I'm going to give you money so that I can do that. So that will be out sometime soon. Yes. Let's see, you in the front and then you in the back. You first. My Div 3 was an album of original music that I wrote and performed and recorded, and it's awful, and nobody is ever going to hear it. But it was a lot of fun to do. I basically just got to live in a recording studio for 6 months, so it was a good time. And you, sir?
I know, like, from
Yes.
Is that like a way that the corporate takes to actually go? Or
Well,
are artists just that independent that they just wouldn't stand?
It's honestly like there are a bunch of webcomics who are published by big people. Octopus Pie is put out by Random House now. So is Penny Arcade. Wondermark. There are a whole bunch on Dark Horse these days. Mega Tokyo is published by DC now, and they all do just fine. It's not really a corporate takeover. It's just that they get better distribution deals than if they were doing it themselves. I mean, if you get signed to Random House, that means your comic is in every Barnes and Noble in the country. It's a pretty big deal. So it's not really a takeover. They don't exercise any editorial control over the content. They're just providing distribution. The tricky part is that if you self-publish, you make like 10 times as much money. I mean, that's the reason I'm getting the book published through Topato Co. Because A, they can do it all, and B, I get so much of a bigger cut of the sales that there's really no reason for me to go to a big publisher. I don't need my book in Barnes & Noble because I have enough of you guys who will hopefully buy it that I will do okay without, random strangers purchasing it because it looks weird. So yeah. Anybody else in the back?
You were saying that Martin was based off you at the beginning. How much is Martin still based on you?
Less and less over the years. It wasn't even that he was based off of me. Simply, he tends to have similar opinions on things. We have pretty different outlooks because we have very different lives. Obviously, at this point, I mean, he's not doing an online cartoon or whatever. I think he's also a lot less. He's a lot more spineless than I am. He's a lot less sure of himself than I've become over the years. He's still the character that's like closest to me in terms of personality, I think, but they all reflect, different little chunks of my psyche. So, yeah.
Did you ever find in real life with the thoughts of?
Oh, I can't write fights. It's so hard to write an argument between two of the characters because it's just so like negative and stressful, and like I just want to like shake them both. Like, you're both being idiots. Stop. And then, yeah, so that's very, very difficult. And then, like, when I do the QC character Twitters, I always start to feel a little bit schizophrenic after about 5 minutes. But that's fun, too. So.
Have you, as a writer, come into any problems because your characters are so lost at their age right now, the 20?
They haven't become more difficult to write. I mean, I guess I won't really know if that changes until further down the line because it's a very gradual thing. They feel more like my kids than anything else. They feel like, I've kind of raised them and I'm watching them and, I'm hoping the best for them, but we're just going to see how it goes. So yeah, I don't think it's changed much, but it certainly could have, and I'm just not aware of it. I don't have nearly enough distance from the work to be able to say for sure. And somebody else had a hand up over here. Why are they late? You got 5 a week, motherfucker. Don't complain. The real answer to that is that for a long time I was a real stickler about trying to get them up by midnight. But it got to the point where that was actually getting in the way of doing better art. It was like, oh, I've got to get this done by midnight, so I'll just copy and paste this panel, or I'll just rush it and not take my time with the art. And it was starting to show. It was like the art was not improving as fast as it should be. So eventually I was like, you know what, fuck it. They're gonna go online when they're done. I don't care if it's 3 in the morning or 10 p.m. or whatever. It's just going to go up when it's done. And my art's gotten so much better ever since I made that choice that I don't regret it for a second. And also, nobody really cares except for you. All right. Anybody else? You in the apron, then you. Right on. Good. I get more ad money that way. Oh God, I have no idea. I'm going to give you an answer, and it's funny because it's the same answer I've been giving for 3 years of real life time. It's been more than 6 months, but less than 2 years. But anything more than that, I don't know for sure. I mean, it usually goes day to day, but there are like gaps where I'll jump an unspecified amount of time. So yeah, I have no idea. I don't really pay attention to it. So yes, and you, sir.
I got 2 questions.
Oh, it's horrible. It's bad. Thank God I do conventions and stuff like this, or it would never get reset. I mean, I pretty much just stay up until I get tired and then sleep until I'm not tired anymore. But that basically just means that I have like a 26-hour cycle, so it's constantly rolling over. So yeah, there will be a couple months this winter where I won't see sun. It'll be bad. I really wish I could get a handle on that. I've been assured by older cartoonist friends that once you hit about like 30, 32, you just can't do that anymore. But I'm 30 and I'm still doing it, so we'll see. Oh, I would show them, let's see. I would show them the really early one. Oh God, let me see if I can find it. I wish I had not gotten into the habit of giving my comics completely nonsensical titles, because it makes it utterly impossible for me to find things when I'm looking for them in my archive. Let's see, I think it was like 73 or something. Yes. This is the one that I would show everybody. The one where Pint Size is like, Faye, I'm effectively immortal. And Faye just pushes him over. It's funny, this is actually still probably my second favorite comic I've ever did, and it's one of the first I ever did. It's just really hard to top. So that's probably the first one I would show them. And then I would just go to the latest one, because the art is not as shitty. Also, there's boob grabbing, so that would probably be a good, in. So yeah, that would be my plan. I think we have time for one more, so... Oh, are we done? Fuck it, I'm going to answer one more. You.
Just a quick question, considering your archive. I know,
I've thought about it. It's something that I would like to do, break it up into chunks if you wanted to read it like that. But unfortunately, it would require completely recoding the site, because it's the most bare bones, basic duct tape together PHP ever. My girlfriend at the time still can't believe that it's actually running with, this many comics. So once I eventually get the site redesigned, I think that's something that I will go back and do, because I think that would be handy. And with that, I think we're done. Thank you so much, guys.